Eh, Good afternoon, everyone. So this is our course, International Trade, Theory and Policies. And this is our 5th chapter. I want, this chapter is the last chapter for our midterm exam. So I would like to ask, to talk about midterm exam next week. Because starting from May 11 will be a midterm exam date. So your midterm exam will be by next week. Okay, not next week actually. Next week we will have summary. Okay, summary from chapter 1 to chapter 5. Then after 2 weeks you will have a midterm exam, and that midterm exam will be take-home exam, which means I will give you questions on the portal, and you have to answer these questions and send them back through the portal to me, right? So it's a kind of, maybe you can call it an assignment, okay? Because we cannot have a face-to-face midterm exam. So the alternative we have is for you to have an assignment, and this assignment will be considered as the midterm exam. Okay, so next week I will talk more about the midterm exam, the questions type, and how you can how you have to answer these questions, and how you have to prepare the answers and send me back through the portal. Okay, so the midterm exam will be will be like an assignment. Okay, so there will not be a face-to-face midterm exam. Okay, so for today I want you to enable your videos. Okay, just disable the audio but enable the videos, so that because we have about 17 or 18 students in this class, so it will not be that difficult to manage through the videos. Okay, so you can enable your cameras, but just disable the audio only. Okay. So last week we have discussed about the 4th chapter, which is a specific factor model, and this is our 5th chapter, where we talk about a little bit different model, which is a model of two-factor economy. So the last week we were talking about single factor economy, where labor is a significant contributor to competitive advantage of a business. Okay, so today we'll talk about two-factor economy today. Okay, so I will just mention some of the objectives we have for this chapter. Okay, so the topic for our chapter is resources and trade. The Hexter all-in model. So these are two authors who proposed this model. Okay, Hexter and all-in. So you remember the Ricardian model. So we have talked about the Ricardian model in our 3rd chapter. And in Ricardian model, we have said there is a single factor of production, and that single factor of production is labor, right? So in this chapter, resources and trade, this chapter focuses on the abundance of resource as a major means of competitive advantage, okay, not labor. But it also recognizes that not only labor, but there are other factors of production like capital and land, okay, and also material resources. But this chapter, All-in and Intr model, um, uh, proposes that the competitive advantage of a country is determined by the abundance of resource it has. Okay, so the reason why they say this is for example, you have USA and Canada. Okay, Canada actually exports forest products to the US. Okay, and Canada is exporting these forest products to the US not because US is not able to produce these forest products, but the reason is because Canada has a land resource, okay, a land resource which is higher than the US, okay. So in Canada, the land per capita or per individual is very big. So they have abundant resources of land to produce forest products. Okay, so it's not because of the labor that Canada has this competitive advantage of producing forest products. Rather, it is because of the resource. Okay, so that's why they claim that labor is not a source of competitive advantage for a nation, but rather it is the abundance of resource. Okay, so you can compare this to the Ricardian model and how it is different from the Ricardian model. Okay, so I'll just mention some of the objectives for our chapter. Okay. So after reading this chapter, you will be able to explain how differences in resources generate a specific pattern of trade. So resources are the major source of competitive advantage, as I've said. So we'll explain how differences in resources generate a specific pattern of trade. And the other is discuss why the gains from trade will not be equally spread, even if the long run, and identify the likely winners and losers. So this all-in Hexter model claims that even in the long run, there will be losers and there will be those winners in trade. Okay, so we'll talk about why the gains from trade will not be equally spread. And the third objective is understand the possible links between increased trade and rising wage inequality in the developed world. Okay. And the fourth objective is see how empirical patterns of trade and factor prices support some but not all of the predictions of the factor product proportion theory. Okay, so these are our objectives. So as a preview, you can see from the screen that factor constraints and production possibilities will be discussed, how factors endowments affect output, comparative advantage in trade, changing the mix of inputs, okay? The mix of inputs in a sense, trying to use these different inputs as substitutions. One substitutes the other. So we will see how the graph changes when we can mix inputs. And the other is how prices of goods affect the income of factors. And factor price equalization is the other, trade and income distribution, empirical evidence. So this will be the previous, okay? So let's get started about the introduction, okay? So in addition to differences in labor productivity, which was studied in Ricardian model. Okay, so in Ricardian model, we have said the determinant factor is labor, right? So in addition to differences in labor productivity, trade occurs to differences in resources across countries. So this is what is proposed by Hexter all-in model. Okay, they say it's not only labor, but trade occurs due to differences in resources across countries. Okay, so actually they believe that it is this difference in abundance of resource that determines the competitive advantage of trade. Okay, so the Hexter all-in theory argues that trade occurs due to differences in labor, labor skills, physical capital, or other factors of production across countries. Okay, so you might remember that in Ricardian model we have said that there is only one factor of production, and that is labor. And this labor is what differentiates one country from the other, and that is the source of competitive advantage. Okay, but so we are building up, we are trying to understand the labor aspect of the trade, and now we will be talking about other factors, okay, the resources. Okay, so the Ricardian model has its own assumptions, its own drawbacks, but also there are some realities or some factors explained in Ricardian model. Okay, so today we will be talking about the other factors. Okay, then we will continue like that to build a full picture of what a competitive advantage comprises of, right? So countries have different relative abundance of factors of production, okay? Relative abundance. So in our example, as I've said, there is USA and there is Canada, and Canada exports forest products to the US, okay? And as I've said, it's not because USA doesn't have the labor or the technology to produce these forest products, but Canada has a relative abundance of resources of producing this forest products than the US, okay? Which means Canada has a land which can be used to produce forest products, okay? So the land per capita or the resource Canada has to produce this forest products is abundant as compared to its neighbor US. Okay, so it is better, or it has a less comparative advantage to buy this forest products from Canada than to produce them in the US. So that's why the US imports this forest products from Canada, right? Because Canada has this comparative advantage of resource, okay? So production process use factors of production with different relative intensity. So this relative intensity or the production intensity could also be influenced by the technology available to production, okay? So you have to make sure here that what differentiates Hexter all-in theory or model from the Ricardian model is Hexter all-in actually considers that there are other factors of production like land, capital, and mineral resources than only labor, okay? So this is the introduction. So just like we studied or we discussed about the Ricardian model, there was assumptions in Ricardian model, right? So the same thing in Hexter all-in model, we have also assumptions, okay? And our explanations or the examples that we'll be discussing on to show that abundant resources are actually the source of comparative advantage will be based on these assumptions. Okay, so the first assumption is there are two countries. We have home country, we have foreign country. Okay, so this is used because we want to compare the relative comparative advantage, right? And we want to compare the opportunity cost, so that whether producing at home or buying these products from the foreign will have the advantage. Okay, and the other is we have two goods. We have clothes and we have food. So we'll be talking about clothes and food as our products. Okay, so I'll give you examples, but clothes, as you know, is labor intensive. So too much labor is used to produce clothes, and food is capital intensive. Okay, so we'll talk about this. And the third assumption is there are two factors of production. We have labor and we have capital. Okay, so you see that in assumptions in Ricardian model, we have said that there is only one factor of production, and that factor of production is labor. Okay, but in Hexter all-in model, we have two factors of production, the labor and we have capital. Okay, so actually this Hexter all-in model is also called 2 by 2 by 2. Okay, so the reason they call it 2 by 2 by 2 is because we have two countries, we have two goods, and we have two factors of production. Okay, so that's why, that's the reason why it is called 2 by 2 by 2. Okay, and the fourth assumption is mix of labor and capital used varies across goods. Okay, so that means the amount of labor and the amount of capital we use to produce either clothes or food might vary. Okay, it's not necessary that it must be proportional. Okay, so maybe we will use 2 units of labor to produce clothes, but we need like 4 units of labor to produce food. Okay, and also the capital requirement is to produce clothes and food also might vary. Okay, and the fifth assumption we have is the supply of labor and capital in each country is constant and varies across countries. Okay, and the sixth assumption is both labor and capital can move across sectors. So which means we can substitute them. Okay, equalizing them returns and wage and rental rate across sectors. So we'll talk about the fact that, for example, if wage is very high, are we better off producing more clothes or more food? Okay, or if rental rate is higher, are we better off producing more clothes or more food? Okay, so we'll talk about this. And the seventh assumption is countries have the same technology and the same consumer tastes. Okay, so at the end, maybe you can all consider this as a limitation for a Hexter all-in model, because countries differ in their technology, and their consumers are also have they also have different tastes. Okay, but this is an assumption used by Hexter all-in model, and it has its own limitations, just like the Ricardian model. Okay, so these are our assumptions. Okay, this Hexter all-in model is called 2 by 2 by 2 model, as I've said. Okay, then let's proceed So just like the production possibility frontier that we had in Ricardian model, we are now trying to draw the production possibility frontier. You know, so I guess what you know what production possibility frontier means. Okay, so production possibility frontier is how much optimal number of two different products a country can produce with or by consuming all the resources it had. Okay, that is called the production possibility frontier. So for example, if a country has 10 units of labor or 10 people and it has $100, so production possibility frontier means with consuming or using all the 10 people and all the capital we have, that is $100, how many clothes and how many food can we produce? That is a production possibility frontier, okay? The reason is because sometimes, for example, we might use all the capital, but use only few, or let's say 5 units of labor and all capital, and might produce less clothes and more food, okay? Or we might use all 10 units of labor and less capital and might produce more clothes and less food, okay? But the thing is, when we use less of one of these resources, it means that the resource is not efficiently utilized, okay? So when we talk about production possibility frontier, we are trying to find a point where we can use both resources we have, in our case, both labor and capital, and produce the maximum amount of clothes and food that we can produce, okay? Using all the resources we have. That is what production possibility frontier is. And that is what economics and trade is all about, right? Because in economics, we say economics is about using scarce resources, right? So we have scarce resources in numbers of capital and labor. So we are trying to find a production possibility frontier where we can utilize all this land or labor and capital we have, right? So I want you to understand clearly what production possibility frontier is, okay? Because, for example, let me pass to the graph and show you the, okay? Yeah, for example here, because I want you to have, sorry for that, this computer is a new computer and it's, I don't know, it gets busy. So in the meantime, I want you to enable your videos, okay? I think most of you haven't heard of my instructions. So please enable the videos and only disable the audio so that I can see what is going on. So, okay, let's proceed. Okay. So I think you can see it now, right? So I was trying to show you the production possibility frontier, but I'm afraid this computer is very busy, so I'll just go on, okay? I hope you understood what production possibility frontier mean, okay? So this, we're trying to now to draw the production possibility frontier, and let's start with what we have, right? So fixed mix of capital and labor in each sector we have. So to produce 1 yard of clothes, we need this capital. You know, we use K for capital, right? So we use A KC of 2, capital, and labor we use L, okay? So K is capital, right? And L is labor. So we have AKC, which is capital used to produce yard of clothes. So we have 1 yard of clothes. Okay, to produce 1 yard of clothes, we need 2 capital and 2 labor. Okay, and to produce 1 pound of food, we need 3 capital and we need 1 labor. Okay. So this is the different mix of capital and labor we have, okay? So the other given thing is fixed amount of capital and labor available for production in each country is capital, we have 3,000 units at home, and land, we have 2,000 hours of labor available to produce in the home country, and we have 4,000 to produce capital to produce this in foreign country, and 2,000 labor. So you differentiate this. If there is asterisk, it means this belongs to foreign, right? And this is home production, okay? So in our assumption we have said we have home and foreign production, okay? So so we will be using this given capital and labor to draw our production possibility frontier, okay? So you can see we have capital, okay, 2 capital here, and we have 3 capital here, okay? So the total capital we have is 5, right? And we have 2 labors and 1 labor here. So we have 3 labors to produce both food and clothes, okay? But the maximum amount of capital a home has got is 3,000, and maximum capital, I mean labor home has got is 2,000, okay? So we will draw the production possibility frontier, okay? So I will come back to this later on. So relative factor intensity. So from this, what do you understand? For example, to produce food, we need 1 unit of labor, right? But to produce clothes, we need 2 units of labor. What does this mean? Then this means clothes is more labor intensive than food, right? Because we only need 1% to produce food, but we need 2 hours or 2 units of labor to produce clothes, okay? So this shows that clothes is more labor intensive than food, right? But if you see capital, we need 2 capital to produce 1 yard of clothes, but we need 3 capital to produce 1 pound of food. So which means food is more capital intensive than production of clothes, right? So from this, you have to easily understand clothes is labor intensive and food is capital intensive, right? So, and we have maximum capital 3,000, okay? So I'll just talk about the easy matters now. Okay, so if you have in home you have 3 units of capital, 2,000 hours of labor, right? If you use 3,000 of all your capital to produce clothes, how many clothes are you going to produce? How many yards of clothes are you going to produce? So it is just 3,000, but clothes requires 2 capital, right? So 3,000 over 2 is equals to 1,500, right? So if you use all the capital you have to produce only clothes, then you can produce 1,500 clothes, right? Because the total capital you have is 3,000 and it requires 2 capital to produce 1 yard of clothes, then it means 3,000 over 2, then you can produce 1,500 if you use all your capital to produce clothes. Okay, and what if you use all your labor to produce, for example, food? Okay, so which means one labor, right, to produce 1 pound of food. So if you use all the labor you have to produce food, you can produce 2,000 pounds of food, right? Because it requires only 1 unit or 1 hours of labor to produce 1 yard of food, right? But as I've said, that is not what production possibility frontier is about, okay? We are not trying to use all our resources just to produce one product. We are trying to find the maximum amount of clothes and the maximum amount of food that we can produce using both capital and land, okay? Not all capital, not all land, but we are trying to find the maximum amount of land, maximum amount of capital that we can use to produce the maximum unit of both clothes and food. Okay, that is what is production possibility frontier means. Okay, so we are not considering the consumption of all capital and all labor. Okay, what we are trying to find in production possibility frontier is how much or what maximum number of clothes and what maximum number of foods we can produce. Okay, we might not produce many clothes or many food as we use all the capital and all the labor to produce one of these products. Okay, so clothes production is labor intensive, as we have already seen, okay, because it requires more units of labor than production of food, right? If clothes production uses more labor for each unit of capital than food production, okay, so that is, you can see that's the ratio here, okay, so you can say clothes is more labor intensive, okay, or you can consider my example here that it requires 2 units of labor to produce 1 yard of clothes, but it requires only 1 labor to produce 1 pound of food. Okay, so we can say clothes is more labor intensive. In the example, clothes uses 1 hour of labor for every unit of capital, while food uses 1/3 of hours of labor for every unit of capital in production. So that comes from just dividing, so finding the ratio of labor and capital for clothes and for food. Okay, so from this you can see that clothes production is more labor intensive. Okay, then I will get back to this. I'll fix some issues with this, then I'll be back within 5 minutes. Okay.